war in Ukraine is just one of the issues the Central Intelligence Agency is closely monitoring. The CIA is marking its 75th anniversary this year, so we visited the headquarters at Langley to speak with Director William Burns and asked him if Putin is concerned about the advances Ukraine's military is making as hundreds of thousands flee Russia.
He's got to be concerned, and not just about what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine, what's happening at home, and what's happening internationally. You know, he stood next to Xi Jinping last February, just before the war started, and they proclaimed a friendship without limits. Well, it turns out that that friendship has some limits, too. I mean, the Chinese have controlled their enthusiasm for Russia's conduct of this war. They haven't provided the kind of military support that Putin had been looking for as well. So he's got to be troubled by what he sees, but he's also stubbornly confident in his own judgments. He believes he's tougher than anybody else.
You make it sound like he's even more dangerous.
Putin cornered, Putin who feels his back against the wall, can be quite dangerous and reckless. And we saw, you know, the flawed assumptions that he's made before the war. I think he's basing his approach now on equally flawed assumptions where he thinks he can tough it out with the Ukrainians and with the United States and with the West.
How closely is China watching what's happening in Ukraine?
Oh, I think President Xi is watching what's happening in Ukraine like a hawk. I think he's been sobered to some extent by the poor performance of the Russian military. The Chinese leadership is also looking at what happens when you stage an invasion and the people you're invading resist with a lot of courage and tenacity as well. So I think all of that has been sobering and in some ways unsettling for the Chinese leadership.
You mean it could sober President Xi's ambitions with Taiwan?
I think it could. President Xi insists today that while he is firmly committed to unification, in other words, to achieving control over Taiwan, that his preference is to pursue means to achieve that short of the use of force. But he's also instructed his military, we know, to be prepared no later than 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. So the reality, at least as we see it, is that the further you get into this decade, the greater the risks rise of a potential conflict.
And you can see more of our interview with Director Burns on CBSNews.com.